Good day, YouTube. I think there is a conversation to be had about whether Chapter 6 is the most underwhelming chapter in Black Myth Wukong. Well, the TLDR, in my opinion, is that the highs, the climax, and the good things about Chapter 6 are some of the best moments in the game. And then some of the lows, the flaws, the not so good bosses and moments, are probably also some of the worst parts of an otherwise exceptional experience. So let's just go straight into it. Chapter 6 is kind of sitting on the shoulder of giants because the previous 5 chapters has set up this rich tapestry with interesting bosses, good combat mechanics, and a very compelling story. And all this got to come to a very good conclusion for us to be gratified as consumers. And so there's a lot of pressure going on into Chapter 6 actually. And if the rumors are to be true, the developers actually rushed through the processes of Chapter 5 and 6 in order to deliver this game in time. Having said that, let's just go through what actually happened in Chapter 6. It starts off authentically enough with a very good boss fight against the Supreme Inspector. This guy has all the ingredients of the previous bosses of the older chapters, right? He has an interesting design, his combat mechanics is challenging, so you feel very gratified after you beat him, even though the fucker cannot be touched for more than 60% of the combat. But defeating him gives you that sense of purpose and challenge like most of the other bosses do in the previous chapters, and you are immediately granted the Nimbus cloud, which was like a game changer. The curtains unveiled, and then with the Nimbus cloud you go into this open sandbox territory, the Hua Guo Shan, where you can go anywhere you wish in a very big wide space. And this presents itself as a very different terrain from the earlier chapters, and I'm like, oh, color me surprised, this chapter is starting to look really good. And going into the unknown, you have the lightning striking in 2 locations to indicate to you that these are the 2 places you should visit to take care of the 2 bosses that are there. So up to this point, I think Chapter 6 starts off really well, very interesting, very innovative, and the Nimbus Cloud aesthetics reminds me a lot of the 1986 TV adaptation, so that nostalgic factor also comes in, right? So the first 2 bosses are the Golden Horn Rhino as well as the deer, the Cloud Treading Deer. And both boss fights are pretty decent. I enjoyed the fights, I like the mechanics, and the game design and everything is gorgeous. So once you finish these 2 bosses, the giant Beetle, the Fengtail General, will commence hopping from mountain to mountain. And again, this is another interesting design decision. You have a giant Beetle in the distance, right? And that is just, a sight to behold. But I think at this point, some of the problems of the chapter start to come in, which would be actually the Fengtail General itself, which I'll touch on a little bit later. The second problem would be that you very quickly start to discover that the rest of Mount Hua Guo is very deserted, very desolate and empty and void of content. Sure, there are a lot of other little side bosses along the way, but they are so weak in comparison. The 4 poison chiefs, what do they add to the narrative? Where do they come from really, And the kind of loot that you get from defeating some of these bosses or exploring some of these places are very, very underwhelming. There is this Jianlong, this giant Jurassic looking dragon that is somehow managed to get himself concealed in 10 centimeters depth of water, and then there's this other water hippopotamus that looks like he came out of Ikea, the waterwood beast. These are all very forgettable bosses. The Child of Stone is pretty decent. I feel like an asshole after killing him, but I do need to fill up my journal, and at least I know he can be happy joining his father and mother whom I have killed in the earlier chapters. And then Shi Gandang, the giant Shi Gandang, I think must be the weakest boss in this entire game. Sure, he's the biggest boss, and so the sense of scale is very compelling, but the fighting is so weak, Just he moves and swirls his fists around, and in order to avoid him, you stay as far as possible at the edge of the map. And then once in a while, he will go to sleep, and then you have to go rush in and try to beat his fist with your staff and hit the blue crystals to wear his health down. I think that is such an unconvincing mechanic. A lot more things could have been done to this battle, which I think given game science competency and their track record, surely they would have thought of using the Nimbus Cloud to fly around the giant Shikantang so that you can strategically hit certain places around him to weaken him as part of phase 1, and then in phase 2 maybe he shrunk and then you can turn into the giant stone monkey to go King Kong versus Godzilla and fight with him. And I think there are a lot of missed opportunities in some of these bosses here where they can be given more character, more depth, and definitely more loot so that there could be more armor pieces that we can collect, more medicine that we can collect as we defeat some of these bosses, just to make the final battles against Erlang, the Stone Monkey, and the Broken Shell that bit easier and more interesting. And then we talk about the Fengtail General. I mean, the mechanics is simple enough. You got to stay on him, and then you got to make sure you have enough stamina and enough health, enough fireproof resistance. Sure, you know, but the fact that this Fengtail Beetle goes on a linear path means that it is very confusing because you can never complete the quest if you hop onto his 4th, 5th or 6th pit stop. There just is not enough pit stops subsequently for you to hold on to complete the quest, and it becomes very needlessly frustrating. This could be solved if it could be better explained firstly, or if the Beetle goes kind of on a loop circuit in a circular fashion rather than in a linear fashion, and then gamers wouldn't find themselves getting kicked out of this trial without really understanding what happened. You asked me to press on E and I did, so why am I not fulfilling this quest line? And then I have no problems with the mantis. I think fighting in Bachie's stomach is quite innovative. It is a change of environment, and the fighting mechanics itself is quite interesting. Now, from this point onwards, it gets better and better. Because once you fight Erlang, you will be treated to a spectacular scene in the heavens where you sized up and then go against the 4 heavenly kings. And this is one fight that I will really remember for a very long time. It's one of those moments in gaming where you go, oh shit, this is so fucking dope, you know. And then subsequently, the penultimate fight against the Stone Monkey and the eventual fight against the Broken Shell, they are challenging and they are really good and epic in their own ways. Different people will have different moments in some of these battles. I like the Erlang fight the most, some people like the Broken Shell, and I think the ending animation and how they wrap up the entire storyline of this game was spectacular. The ending animation gave us moments of nostalgia as we listened to the 1986 theme song. It's sort of like a national anthem to so many of us in Southeast Asia as well as in China, I believe, right? So overall, the game ended really on a high, and it's just that little blip when you start to explore Mount Hua Guoshan where you feel like, you know, there should have been a little bit more care. It could have been cooked a little bit better, and some of the bosses over there could have been more interesting with more depth. Yeah, that's probably the only complaint in an otherwise Game of the Year level experience. So do you agree or disagree? Would you find Chapter 6 underwhelming or not up to standards as compared to the previous chapters? Leave your comments, and as usual, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.